This is the Lug Nuts Podcast. Hey everybody, this is Zach, and thanks for joining us this week. Sam and I sat down to discuss a number of topics in automotive news this past week. We touched on a few different electric cars that are on the horizon. And while we do mention the Tesla Model Y, we were actually talking about this before some of the other details have been announced. Pricing and all that good stuff is out. You can certainly check that out on Tesla's website. We also touch on some issues that are surrounding direct injection engines and their longevity, as well as the new Genesis G70. Hope you enjoyed this week's conversation. Thanks. Car news.
Our news. First off, we're back.
We are back.
We're back. And we say that every time, like we were gone on like a 6-month vacation, but...
No, I was sick last week, though.
Yeah, so we haven't been able to record, but we're back, and we got car news. We have some new features that we're going to talk about. So
we are? New features of the show?
Yeah.
Or new features of...
No, like new segments.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, come on, you came up with this.
I thought you meant like a feature. I'm thinking like, I don't know. I was thinking like a feature, like a... like a car feature or something, like a a button that the flux capacitor button or something.
No, they're still working on that.
All right, well,
yeah,
get it together.
Some interesting car news on electric cars.
Yep, electric news maybe.
Electric news. There should be like a sound of like a lightning bolt or something.
Like our first episode, second episode. I think I put in a cool sound effect there, but
okay,
yeah,
just getting kind of lazy on that. But anyway. The Porsche has announced that the next Macan will be fully electric.
Yeah.
So they're like betting down on that,
They are, indeed.
They had double the amount of orders they expected for the Taycan.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Porsche's kind of seeing that, their customer base is like, hey, we dig this electric car thing. Like, let's roll with this.
Yeah.
So
it makes sense maybe on that platform, I think. Like, it seems like that's probably large enough to have a substantial battery pack so you get good range. And let's face it, electric cars right now are not the cheapest things available.
No, so it works for a luxury automaker.
For a luxury automaker, exactly. If you're aimed at customers who can afford, a higher end expensive vehicle, then yeah, it probably makes sense to offer that, have an electric offering.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the more common man vehicle, the Tesla Model 3 can now be ordered at the $35,000 price point.
It can be, that's true.
Which, doesn't look to be too shabby. I mean, if you were in the market between that and like a Bolt, that could be a viable possible option.
Yeah, I would go Hyundai Kona EV all the way if I was in that price category.
Yeah. I would probably have to go with you on that as well.
All those vehicles kind of around that price point, that's where I'd go.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is available now. Now there were some very weird things that they did with their pricing, and I think maybe the left hand of the company didn't know what the right hand was doing, as far as adjusting things like autopilot, and then people were pissed off basically at Tesla for a minute there when they adjusted their pricing. They dropped the pricing on a bunch of other models, which basically instantaneously meant that people who had already bought those cars lost a lot, in depreciation instantly too. So they were in the news recently a lot, at least in my news feed, for not the greatest reasons necessarily.
Yeah. Well, speaking of electric, Porsche said that by 2025 they hope that half of their portfolio is electric or hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
The new 911, which I believe is dubbed the 992 internally.
But it's a 911.
Yeah, but it was 991 was the previous one, and
why not just call it a 911?
You got to have internal names. We've talked about this.
But I just get so confused.
They think that this generation will have some type of hybridization in the 911. I'm thinking it's going to be like an e-assist kind of thing to help you like launch out of like a corner or something,
like F1 style stuff or whatever.
Exactly.
Formula One.
Yeah,
that whole thing. What's that thing called with the like Formula One did that, where they can like you can spin up some. It's like a flywheel or something like that.
And Porsche has tested that, and I think they've used that. I think you're going to see something like that, or possibly just the setup where you're in town and you could be on electric only, if you're sitting in traffic or something like that. So it's just interesting. I never thought, much like when we went from air cooled Porsches to, liquid cooled, it was like the end of the world. Now you're going to have a hybrid 911. Like, did you ever think that those two words would like be in the same like party?
Not really. I mean, in some senses, especially with sports cars, to me it makes more sense to just go straight to electric.
Yeah,
which is what they've done with the Taycan, but and it makes more sense to go straight to electric because with a hybrid vehicle or a plug-in hybrid vehicle, you have, when you're operating on electric only, you have the weight of the internal combustion engine and its fuel that you're carrying around on electric power. And then when you switch over to gasoline power, you have the weight of the electric system and its motors and its battery and its components that you're dragging around with the gasoline. So
good point.
It ends up being kind of in some senses, the worst of both worlds. In some sense, the best of both worlds, because you can like drive at least for some period of time without using gas and then still not have the range anxiety.
That's why I think like the BMW i3 is a great solution because it's got that little scooter motor in it. It only holds like 2 gallons of gas. So that's going to charge you up enough to get, and it never runs off of that. That just acts as a generator.
Right.
So to me, that seems like a cool, you're not going to be stranded with that.
Right. And I think maybe that's until we get the infrastructure in place, I think we're still going to see like dependence on hybrid vehicles or dependence on either plug-in hybrids or just dependent on regular hybrids, et cetera. Speaking of like everyman vehicles, though, the other one that was in the news recently that I saw, and speaking of plug-ins, was Ford is now working on a plug-in version of the F-150.
Wow.
Which is going to come sooner rather than later. Actually, they're saying by 2020. I don't know when exactly in 2020 that's coming out. They had also mentioned a fully electric F-150, but they kind of quieted down about that. Now, my own personal view there is they're probably scared of Rivian coming in and carving out a piece of the market before Ford has a product to put out.
Yeah.
Because you've not heard any news over the past couple of years about even like any version, hybrid anything on an F-150.
I think maybe they're playing it safe too. Like, let's bring in this hybrid and see how it sells. And you and I talked to what we would consider to be like your typical kind of F-150 customer a couple weeks ago at work, and we said, hey, what do you think of an electric F-150? And remember, his response was like, he's like, I would love it. Like, it's just we don't have the infrastructure for it yet.
Yeah, and that was his response, and his response was like, if it's something that's going to save me money, I'm all for it. That was his angle.
Yeah,
coming at it. He wasn't concerned necessarily about, he was not what we call an environmentalist or anything like that. Not that there's anything wrong with being that, I don't think, but his attitude was just purely financial.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see how their audience and their buyers tend to that. So we wish them luck because it'll be cool, and I think it's the perfect vehicle for that platform. I mean,
for sure,
that skateboard kind of chassis chassis that you can put those batteries in, and the torque, everything else, it just makes sense to have that.
Yeah. Interestingly, I just read too, Rivian was testing their skateboard, they're calling it the skateboard. They were testing that around Michigan with F-150 bodies on top. And they said for no real reason other than it fit the wheelbase perfectly. But
that's funny.
They've been driving around these electric F-150s with Rivian underneath for months to put miles on it. They need, the engineers need to get data and miles on those things to test them. But that was amusing to me.
Wow, that is amusing. Well, another plug-in hybrid that was recently announced, the Jeep Renegade is going to come in with a plug-in hybrid, which will be great. Think of like the Pacifica that they currently have, which has that electric only range. So, if you're going to use this, to me, this is like awesome because it could be your urban vehicle during the week, short commutes, things like that. Electric only, but it's like, oh, now I'm going to go back into the the woods for the weekend. And
yeah,
now
I think it's more of a light duty kind of light off-roading, isn't it?
Oh,
Isn't that
very
more of
much so. Yeah. It's not rated. I mean, basically it's a Fiat 500X. Like it's not a Jeep in the traditional sense of, what you think of as far as off-roading goes.
Right.
It's a primarily front-wheel drive based vehicle. So, but it's kind of interesting. I mean, I think, the Wrangler's supposed to come out with the plug-in.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
I'm really interested to see how that's going to work, like where they're going to put that.
I think, I don't know. I part of, sometimes you want to stereotype buyers and say like, well, their Jeep people aren't going to go for that, but I think they will, like look at the demand for electric cars that's surprised, a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think people are going to go for them maybe more than other predictions might point to.
Well, and if you talk to Jeep people, I was talking to somebody again at work who has the new Jeep Wrangler that has the turboed 4-cylinder,
right?
That essentially has an electric motor for like takeoff, and it's designed.
Huh.
Yeah, so the new Jeep Wranglers come with the standard V6 kind of thing,
right?
But for like $1,000 more, you get this turboed 4-cylinder, and it has like an electric assist start.
Uh-huh.
So wedged somewhere in there, in the drivetrain of that is this electric motor, and I drove the Rubicon with this engine, and it was unbelievable. Like
really?
How quick it was off the line. It just had this, it did not feel like this lumbering slow Jeep. And I was talking to somebody who off-roads a lot, and they said, oh yeah, a lot of the Jeep people are like super pumped about this because off-roading, you have instant torque. So like when they're climbing up some really steep stuff, I never thought I'd see the day when you'd have a turboed 4-cylinder in a Jeep Wrangler. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the way it's going. It's hard. So many manufacturers have turbo 4-cylinders as the standard now. Like gone are the days of like kind of the standard V6. I mean, there's a couple options out there, but like it seems like just about every car review that I've watched recently, and that has been a lot. It's a turbo 4 under the hood. Well, it's kind of the sweet spot as far as like that engine displacement, gas mileage, emissions, all that stuff. That's kind of But speaking of that, you had another topic down here that I think this fits really nicely with is direct injection. So that's something that more and more engines are getting. So talk a little bit about what that is, because some of our listeners may have like no clue what that is.
Yeah. So direct injection is instead of the fuel being injected, sort of through the top of the cylinder head across the valve, it's like a sort of a separate hole into the cylinder, and there is a fuel injector that directly injects the fuel directly into the cylinder, and that introduces a couple of benefits, namely better fuel economy, and emissions are more easily controlled, and you can get better emissions profiles out of the exhaust.
Okay.
But it also introduces a couple problems, and that is namely because there's not fuel spraying across that intake valve every time the cylinder, does its intake cycle. You don't get that solvent sort of action on the back of the valves, which means that there's extra carbon deposits and buildup that can happen on the top of your valves, right? So which isn't a problem probably for the first 30,000 miles or so, but as time goes on, you can get buildup that can cause, rough idling and like misfires and all kinds of problems.
Yeah, to me, it's kind of that we often talk about with modern cars how like it's great for the first 3 years. And then,
right.
Like I don't know what an engine like that's gonna look like when it hits 100,000 miles. I mean they're saying on some of those like 80,000 miles, they basically do this process called walnut blasting where they have to like shoot into that area to get the carbon off the valves.
Yeah, it's walnut shells. It's broken
literally
down. It's literally walnut shells, like sandblasting.
And it's like an $800 service.
It's a lot of money.
It's not cheap,
No.
and but you're almost forced to do it because that buildup gets there, and then it doesn't seal properly, and the engine starts to run rough and everything else.
Right, and it's one of those things. They're doing it also just to kind of like eke that last little. It's just another thing that they're trying to do to eke more efficiency and usability out of an internal combustion engine. Now there are a couple companies that are going to dual injection, right? So the port injection combined with direct injection.
Okay.
Ford is doing that newly. Interestingly, VW is doing it on their European engines, but not doing it on their American engines.
Wow.
Which is odd, right? But that solves kind of both problems, I guess, a little bit. You're still getting some of the benefits of direct injection, but losing sort of that losing sort of the carbon buildup by still getting the fuel sprayed on the back of the valve.
Yeah.
However, that's twice as many injectors per cylinder, so it's more opportunities for things to go wrong. The other thing about direct injection fuel injectors is that they're super high pressure. Like, they are much higher pressure than your standard port injector, right? There's something like 200 PSI or something crazy. Like, you have to have a separate fuel pump that delivers high pressure to those. And the cost, like if you need to replace an injector, the cost is just way higher than it would be on the standard fuel injector.
So again, it gives you like moment for pause as far as like buying a modern car, which, you know, better gas mileage, all of those things, but like down the road, the maintenance and the...
Yeah. Now, of course, the salesman, I had a salesman tell me this very recently. He was like, no, there's no problems. We've been doing this for a long time, but...
Wait. That was a Volkswagen person who said, no problems, we've been doing this for a long time?
Yeah.
That's sort of like the people that said, like, the TDI actually cleaned the air.
Yeah, right.
Like, you could just stand behind the exhaust pipe and take a drink of water of the...
Definitely, totally trust everything they say.
Yeah.
But, so that was, that is something to think about, you know. Now, you know, maybe you can get it, if you don't want to do the walnut blasting, I don't know, maybe you can go cheap and blast some sea foam in there or something like that, and maybe that'll help you. I don't really know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be, again, when more cars get up in miles and they have to deal with it, I think we'll start to see the effects of it.
Yeah, it's almost an advocacy for leasing, though, in a sense. It's just like, you know, maybe just lease it, drive it for 3 years, and then let it become someone else's problem, you know?
Yeah, but then what happens with the used car market when there's a glut of those and everybody knows, like,
cars with 80,000 miles that don't work?
Yeah, that's a little... well, speaking of cars that will go well over 80,000 miles, at least in our predictions, talk about the Genesis G70. You've been doing a lot of reading on this lately.
Yes, I'm reading some interesting review videos that I've been watching. So it kind of competes with the 3 Series in terms of, like, think of it is in terms of size anyway.
Yeah.
And there are 2 engine configurations offered. I can't remember the exact horsepower. I want to say 260 something maybe for the base engine. But the most interesting thing about that one is it's offered with rear-wheel drive and a manual transmission.
Wow.
Which is something that, like, Mercedes, BMW, Lexus, all the other brands, luxury brands, abandon that idea.
Yeah, just to remind our folks that, like, the new BMW 3 Series, which is oddly called the G... that's the letter that the internal name is going to be.
Okay.
I can't remember if it's the G20. Anyway, it sounded like an Infinity or something when I read it. But that will not come stateside with a manual transmission.
Yeah,
the car that was known as the driver's car. So, like, this Genesis allows somebody who is part of the Save the Manuals cult to get a manual in a luxury car.
Yeah, now the old sort of saw, at least on some of the forums you see, is that people are like, well, it'll be great to buy one in 3 years when they're used. It's like, but if nobody goes out and buys those cars new, then they're going to quit making them. You know, it's like people kind of want.
I'm interested why they're even coming out with it, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah. I mean, they can't be making them in huge numbers, you know, but maybe they're doing it to kind of prove a point, you know. Maybe there's some engineer over there who's like, no, like, fuck it, let's do it, you know.
Yeah, people want this.
Yeah, someone's gonna want it, or maybe that I don't know, maybe that manager, product manager, or engineer is just like, you know, he's one of us.
Yeah, I'm just surprised they got that past, like, the penny counters, you know, because it just doesn't seem like something that the people who would buy that car would probably be into. But they may be going towards a younger demographic. They may be like, you know, we're primed to take that spot from BMW, because the 3 Series, the last generation of 3 Series, kind of waffled. Like, the steering was sort of ambiguous, and it just sort of lost that ultimate driving machine feel, you know. And maybe they're, you know, Genesis is like, hey, we're going to build this car and we're going to get these people.
Yeah, they see a hole in the market, maybe, they see that there's a demand there that's not going to be filled. Interestingly, a lot of the reviewers that I saw driving these cars around the track did ultimately say, you know what, I think maybe I'd prefer to have the one with the higher engine level, which is, I don't know, around 350 horsepower. Don't quote me directly on that, but it's the bigger engine, and they just said, yeah, it's automatic only, but you know what, it's more fun.
Well, and the automatics, like today, modern automatics are, I never thought I'd say it, but they're just they're so dialed now,
Yeah,
I mean, like,
there's some really good transmissions.
The fact that, I'm trying to remember the one car company that recently announced that, like, it will use, like, the navigation, like, it knows that, like, a curve is curve in the road's coming up, and it will literally, like blip the throttle as you come down into the turn, things like that. I think it was BMW. Don't quote me on that, but like the fact that like all of these systems are working together now, like that, like, does that not blow your mind?
That does kind of blow my mind a little bit.
Because you come into a curve, like, the car knows before you do that you're going to slow down into this curve, and it's going to put it in the exact right gear, to come out of that curve with the optimal torque and everything.
Yeah,
else.
kind of cool. Kind of like, I don't know. I still long for simplicity a little bit,
Yeah.
That's maybe it's being a little bit of get off my lawn, but
yeah. Well, yeah, and it's a little bit of Big Brother watching, and
there's like a lot of elements to it, right?
The fact that that GPS system is tracking like everything
surely sending that data back to BMW.
Yeah,
and the Hans. Yeah, he is going onto the turn a little fast.
Yes, we need to engineer this. So
sorry, no offense to our German listeners.
No,
all of our listeners in Germany.
That was a terrible accent too.
That was pretty good.
Both of us. Well, yours was better than mine.
Well,
yours was better than mine.
German blood. One more car that was teased recently was the Tesla Model Y recently. So I didn't even, the teaser image was so ambiguous, I couldn't even really tell what the heck it was. But it's going to be apparently on the Model 3 platform. So I think it's crossover-esque, apparently. So it's on the Model 3 platform, and I guess slightly raised ride height, and I'm not sure how much more we know. Do you know anything more about that?
I don't know anything more about the Model Y. I mean, I'm excited for it. I think the Model 3 has some very visually appealing lines to it.
Mm-hmm.
But like the form and function of an SUV, and like I detest the look of the X. Like I get it, and people rave about it, and I guess it defies the laws of physics when you drive it.
It's almost like a Pontiac Aztec or something like that.
Yes.
I don't like it
it's
either.
Like hideous.
The way it looks.
And I get like if you have a bunch of money and you're like, oh, well, look at these cool doors that open this way. Like, but it's, hideous. But I'm guessing this one will have kind of a Model 3, like kind of a lifted Model 3.
Yeah, that's, and I think hatchback-esque sort of thing.
Well, speaking of hatchbacks, you had another note on here, which I thought was interesting. You say that Americans love hatchbacks. They just call them crossovers.
Here's my theory. Americans actually do love hatchbacks, okay? But you just can't call it a hatchback because people are buying these things left and right. Like but they call them crossovers, and there are even ones that are like front wheel drive, and that's it. Like the ones that came to mind. Now they're not huge sellers, but like the Nissan Kicks and the
Toyota
HRC. I don't know. I get those letters confused. CHR, I think is what it's called. But those are not available in all wheel drive.
Yeah.
And like as far as like the lifted component of it, like the extra ground clearance, it's like an extra, I don't know, inch maybe. Tops above like what a regular just passenger car would have, and it has a hatch, and like that. It's a hatchback. I'm sorry. It's a small hatchback, but like you just can't call it that because that seems to be marketing poison, maybe.
Yeah, like you said, like if you use the term crossover, it's like catnip for some car buyers.
Totally. And I don't necessarily get that, but that is what it is.
Well, aside from bad segue, some sad automotive news. The final Chevy Cruze.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the Taurus. That one's on here too.
Well, that's what I say. The final Chevy Cruze and the final Ford Taurus went down their assembly lines recently.
Oh, yeah.
So
end of an era.
Yeah, definitely an end of an era. The Cruze, they built, pull up the little statistics on that one, which I thought was interesting. The Cruze They built approximately 2.1 million of those since 2010. But as car enthusiasts know, the Taurus had a pretty long history. Almost about 800 million Tauruses were built in the Chicago plant.
800?
No. Sorry, 8 million.
8 million. I was going to say
zeros. Math.
Factor of 100.
Yeah. 8 million Tauruses they had 34 years of production. And the Taurus, I have some fond memories of that as a kid. My grandparents had one. And it really was Ford's answer to kind of beating the Japanese as far as like upping their quality. So when it came out in 1980, it came out in 1985 as an 86 model.
Mm-hmm.
They sold like gangbusters.
Did they really? They were cop cars too. Like you see them maybe not until recently, because the Crown Vic was Ford's fleet cop vehicle for a long time. But aren't they like cop
there was
cars now?
the Interceptor. That was like the cop version of it.
Fuck yeah, cop tires.
Yeah,
cop transmission, cop engine. It's like the Blues Brothers, like cop tires, cop engine.
I got you. No,
got half a pack of cigarettes. What is it? Full tank of gas, a half a pack of cigarettes, 300 miles to Chicago. Anyway, it's a whole.
No, that was good. That was good. Man, Aykroyd there. No, anyway, it was a great car, and they had some cool little spin-offs. They had the SVO, or the SHO.
The SHO. That thing had some balls, man.
The first generation one had a Yamaha engine in it.
What?
Yeah, the first generation that
out of a powerboat or something.
No, it was Yamaha built this engine. And I wish I had like all the details on that, but it was. I remember my father-in-law had one, and he just talked about how just unbelievable it was, because it was just this. It was this super high-tech engine that was super fast,
super high output. That's what SHO
super high output
stands for.
Then it's kind of a sad story of a lot of car designs. They did the redesign. In 1997, the Camry finally took over as like the number one selling vehicle over it. It was a hot seller. I mean, it to date was right up there with like the F-150 and the Mustang and everything else. But then they did this redesign, and I'm drifting. They did a redesign, and it looked like a catfish face. Do you remember those?
Like the really rounded corners. They took all the character out of it. Yeah.
Well, it just you couldn't look at it. It was like it was hideous.
Yeah, they weren't attractive. You still see them around on the road sometimes.
Occasionally. Then they did like a facelift where they kind of smoothed it out, and then it was just meh, Mm-hmm. And then it became, for a while, it was the Ford 500 and the Ford Freestyle.
That's right.
Which were terrible. Then they brought it back out in 2010. And they basically said, no, we're bringing the Taurus back. We're killing the Ford 500. And yeah, it's just kind of sad that it is.
So, well, that comes along with them killing every car except the Mustang, right? That's
yeah. I mean, this was not
unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, with Fiesta Focus, the Fusion, they're moving to crossovers and trucks,
mm-hmm.
and SUVs
and hatchbacks.
Yes, bring us. Please keep the Focus RS, but I don't think we're getting those anymore either.
Yeah, those were apparently not the greatest.
No, but I hear anyway. Kind of rest in peace to the Ford Taurus.
And the Chevy Cruze.
And the Chevy Cruze. Now the good news, on the Ford end, they're going to continue to build Explorers in the plant in Chicago. That plant. So they're actually adding jobs. So they're not losing the jobs in that particular plant. The Chevy Cruze plant is
shuttered.
The UAW is saying, "Oh, we're negotiating for something else to come there," but I doubt that's going to happen.
Yeah,
there's a lot of money with that, with retooling and everything else. So you feel badly for those families and things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so rest in peace, Ford Taurus and the Chevy Cruze.
As usual, you can follow us on the normal social media channels like facebook.com/lugnutspodcast. Twitter and Instagram are @lugnutspodcast. And if you'd like to email us for any reason, lugnutspodcast@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, tell a friend. See you next episode. Thanks a lot.